Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Griffin, and I'm a filmmaker based out of Orange County, California. Today we're on day 2 of a pretty cool job with a fire department based out of OC here. So anyways, I'm taking the drone up right now, but the topic for today's video is I want to talk about the new Canon R3 and kind of give you my initial thoughts on it now that all the specs and features are released, and kind of compare that to the Canon C70 and the 1DX Mark III. Let's get into it. We're actually on a job right now, here with Justin again. You guys have seen him, here with Ryan again. Talking about cameras, all these cameras kind of serve different purposes. So the C500, this is generally always my A cam. It's got great 24, it's got great 60 frames per second. It's a full frame sensor. You can rig it up to be like a full production build where you get a nice big 7-inch monitor, you get your full-size XLR audio, it's got built-in ND filters. It's really built perfectly for these sort of run and gun, sort of doc style shoots where we're sort of having to react instead of plan out every single shot and being able to control every single aspect for lighting and for basically our talent, so to speak. So it's a great camera for that. Now jumping into the other cameras though that I use to supplement this, oftentimes it goes between the 1DX Mark III and the C70. So with the C70, the things I really like about it are it's a full cinema camera. You can shoot C-Log 2 and basically all the different flavors from 1080 up to 4K. And it's also got great high frame rate. So you can shoot up to 4K, 120 frames per second. So we'll use that all the time on shoots, and it matches really well with the C500 Mark II. Data rates are really manageable, and it's got a pretty good codec to edit, and it also can shoot proxies internal as well. So this is a really nice option. It's really a workhorse. I would say the downsides, it doesn't have RAW, and the build quality, you know, it's pretty good. I mean, I've taken it in some sketchy situations for sure, but the screen I had to actually get, or the screen hinge had to get replaced, which is kind of a bummer that happened. And then also just, it's got, like most cinema cameras, it'll never overheat because it has these vents, but also the downside of that is if you're in like a really trying environment, you could say, like water, dust, or extreme heat, you might want to be careful with these exposed vents. So that kind of brings me into why I like shooting with the 1DX Mark III sometimes. So like in today's circumstance, we're going to be going inside into this burning building, and they're spraying water. So it's basically super hot, and at the same time, they're literally spraying water, which is like with any camera, you kind of need to be cognizant of like, okay, do I want to get water droplets on my camera? Is it gonna like somehow like stop working or something like that? So that's kind of why I like using the 1DX. So that'd be a real strength of this camera. I've dropped this thing. I've had it in a water housing that got flooded before, literally totally flooded, and it was fine. Actually, that was the 1DX Mark II. But yeah, I mean, it's a great camera. Downsides of this guy are you have to use these screw-on ND filters. Doesn't have waveform, doesn't have continuous 30-minute recording or past 30 minutes. So there's some serious downsides to using a camera like this as compared to like a proper cinema camera. So that kind of brings me to the R3, but we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, so the Canon R3. It's a really interesting camera. I went ahead and pre-ordered one the first day, like the first minute it came out, but bought it with my own money. Nobody's paying me, but Canon, if you want to send a check, I'll send you my address. But unfortunately, nobody pays me for this stuff. I think the Canon R3 is really interesting. It's a full frame sensor, which is, it's cool. The other 1DX is a full frame sensor as well. The C70 is not. So the C70 with the speed booster looks like a full frame. The downside is when you're not using EF glass. So say you want to use some RF glass, it's not full frame. Say you want to use PL mount glass, it's not full frame. So the R3, in all those circumstances, or if you adapt EF glass too, it's going to be full frame. So that's a really nice upgrade for sure. From the C70. Another thing that's really cool is it doesn't have a 30-minute record time limit. That's great if you're recording like longer interviews, for example. So I think we're talking, sorry, we're on a job, we're actually like working, so sometimes I'll have to just cut. So I think we're talking about the R3 and where I see it fitting in. So for me, will it replace my 1DX Mark III? It's really a TBD. I'm not selling my 1DX Mark III yet. I'm still gonna keep it and I'm gonna test them. So for sure we'll have a test coming to the channel, just like I usually do where I compare both cameras side by side. Now, the areas...
Nice shot on that last one.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
appreciate it. So the areas on the 1DX Mark III where I'm not a fan of it, it's the 30-minute record limit. The dynamic range is good, not great. It doesn't have C-Log 2, so it doesn't have C-Log 2 built in unless you shoot in RAW and then interpret it as C-Log 2. So that's something, you know, we're gonna have to find out, is the dynamic range actually improved? One thing that's not great about the 1DX Mark III is the rolling shutter. It's actually probably the worst out of any camera that I've used. It's really bad, and like, I'm always someone that says like, hey, rolling shutter's not a big deal, like it's overrated, like nobody really cares. Well, on the 1DX Mark III I care. It's pretty bad, to be honest, in full frame. So from what Canon's saying, the R3 is gonna have way better rolling shutter performance than the 1DX Mark III. So hoping that it does, and we'll have to find out and see. But we'll go ahead and we'll get into some more of the things that I think about both those cameras and where I see the R3 fitting in against the C70 and the 1DX Mark III. All right, so one of the cool things about the C70 that I like better than the 1DX Mark III is when you're running on a gimbal, it's got built-in ND filters and it's also got a tilty screen. So one of the biggest problems with the 1DX Mark III is since it doesn't have a tilt screen, you'll always have to rig out an extra monitor. And then it's like all of a sudden you've got a monitor, and you've got your Teradek unit sending your wireless signal, and it's just kind of like a lot going on. Whereas on like a single-handed gimbal like this, I prefer basically as minimal of a setup as possible. So that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to with the R3. Finally, Canon, I'm not sure if you can hear, okay. So finally Canon put a full articulating screen on a pro body. Like I was never a huge fan of the R5 just because it had so many issues with overheating. And that's another thing that we'll have to see with the R3. Does it overheat? I know Canon put out some specs that I think it will overheat. They're being upfront about that. But I think it was only in like 4K 60 or 4K 120 if you're running it for more than an hour. So I want to test that in the real world though. I want to see what's it like on a hot day like today. Is it going to stand up to the rigors of production? Because what I basically concluded with the R5 was it just really wasn't a great fit for me with the style of work I do. I don't want to have to think about, is my camera going to overheat? And so with the R3, I'm really looking forward to testing it and putting it through its paces. One of the things with the C70 that I like a lot better than cameras like the 1DX Mark III are the internal codecs. So it's got the XF-AVC codec. You can just bring it straight into Premiere or whatever you're editing with, and you can just start editing straight away. With the 1DX Mark III, it's either in 5.5K RAW, which is great. It's super high quality. The downside is it's gigantic file size, like bigger than like almost anything. It's really huge and it's hard to deal with. And then the other codec is the H.265 codec. And the downside with that is you lose out on C-Log 2, which is my favorite codec because it's got the most dynamic range and the flattest profile. And then you also have to either transcode it or make proxies or be editing on an M1 Mac. And so I don't have one of the M1s yet because it's only got 2 of the Thunderbolt ports and I'm waiting for them to come out with a new one. And I'm sure there's Windows equivalents of whatever those computers are that can transcode the H.265 well, or the playback the H.265 well.
Get ready for shot one.
But yeah, that's something to keep in mind if you're considering these. And I know with the R3, it is going to be that same kind of setup where it's either H.265 or it's full out RAW, which is like, you know, it's okay for like specialty shots. I don't mind using this for a few shots here and there and then just transcoding at the end of the day. But if you're kind of like, for your workhorse camera, the one that you're running all day, you're recording like hours and hours of footage, it's really a downside to have to go and have to transcode it or make proxies. So that's one of the reasons I am excited for the R3, but I don't think it'll be replacing my C70 or my C500. I see it more as like a 1DX Mark III replacement or an R5 replacement. Okay, so one of the things that a lot of people talked about in the beginning when the C70 came out was it's sort of like lackluster autofocus. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't think it's like unbelievable. Although there was a really nice update where it basically can focus on the whole area and just look at the scene intelligently and decide what to focus on. One thing with the R3, if it's anything like the 1DX Mark III, and I know it'll be better based on everything they published, the autofocus is like incredible. It's basically industry leading, world class, which is, it's a lot better than the C500 or the C70.
Ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so I'm gonna have the gimbal in position 1 across the helicopter, and then Luke, you can follow.
I could have stayed for a few more minutes. I was a little worried about my camera because I was like, if my hands are literally burning through these leather gloves, like, is the camera not gonna, is it still gonna work? But like, it's fine. So, I mean.
Dude, ultimate 1DX review.
Yeah, the ultimate review. So that's actually why I love the 1DX.
Hey, what if we were
You know,
wrong?
we'll see if the R3 can hold up to things like that. I would not feel confident with something like a C70 there. So, look, I guess this concludes the little thoughts on the R3 video. If you like this kind of content, consider hitting that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one.